Zakaj kurac art? The sooner you die, the sooner you can be part of history.
Do you think the irony is an easy way out?
Yeah,
also
that is
for
a thing
us who are not artists, who are just talking about art.
I think that there are limits to it, yeah.
Art has to be excellent and it has to hang in a good museum, otherwise it's not good. Otherwise it's trash, right?
I don't know, do you have like newspaper exhibition reviews here?
RIP.
What's the point of making art? Are we making art?
What's the point of making art? Please.
Are we making art to make a stance?
Somewhere, but this is, for example, what Suhail Malik actually criticizes contemporary art for. It's kind of like an island separated from the society, where you can be kind of, even at best, you can be kind of like critical, but like it is just like kind of outside of the society.
What happens when the number of your children is enormous and most of them are trash?
Zakaj kurac art?
Hello and welcome to the second live podcast of this year. This is Kritiški posladek, critical treat in English, where we have wide-ranging conversations about visual art and everything else that relates to it. This episode is the fourth in this year's focus on curatorial practices, both locally and beyond. It is another special one since we are recording live at the DobraVaga gallery in Ljubljana, and we're hosting Serbian curator, art critic and writer Lav Mrenović. We will be talking about and comparing the art scene, the general state of art here and in Belgrade and beyond. Welcome, Lav. This conversation is happening in connection with the Zine Vitrine exhibition that opened yesterday in DobraVaga gallery. Lav Mrenović is one of the winners of last year's International Open Call, and with his submitted essayistic zine, he earned a solo zine exhibition. It is also the first exhibition of this kind at DobraVaga, where the exhibitor isn't an artist, but rather someone who works with them in a supporting role as one of the pillars of the contemporary art scene. The starting point of the discussion is his zine, titled I Feel Like Contemporary Art is Over, or Deluje mi da je savremena umetnost umrla. This zine is a mix of personal confessions, distress, dissatisfaction, indifference, like a sneaky sprint of time creeping into our minds. Why even make or care about art at all? Is it still worth it? Do we push back against art systems that cater to elites and neoliberal capitalism? Is there even space and money for the independent scene? Does anyone care about it, or has art become a speculative commodity that fits in the market-driven society? How are we to survive within the culture sector if there doesn't seem to be any money for the others out there, out of the circle, and a lot of art just feels like trash? Basically philosophical and existential questions filled with dread. We will try to keep things as morbid free and as informative as possible, but for the full first-hand experience, we invite you to read the zine. You can also buy the zine or check it out later here. Joining the conversation, so Lav Mrenović, writer and curator from Belgrade, Jernej Čuček-Gerbec, artist, editor and curator from Šempeter pri Novi Gorici, and me, Maša Žekš, art historian, curator and art critic from Mengeš. All of us are, for now, still somehow working in the cultural sector, all three as independent workers.
Lepo pozdravljeni. Poslušate Kritiški posed.
Posladek.
So, the zine was created during the author's residency at, how do you say it in French?
I actually don't speak French. I think it's Cité Internationale des Arts.
Yeah, this residency in Paris. So the essay is presented in Serbian and in English. It was published under the Varikina Publishing Studio and printed at the Matriarchia Autonomous Culture Center in Belgrade using the risograph technique on 80-gram pink paper. It is a quick but quite heavy read, at moments funny, and throughout, at least for me, very relatable.
This tongue-in-cheek publication raises several important questions, many of them deserving separate comments and conversations. But predominantly it screams three very important questions about art, criticism, and the scene as a whole. All of them summed up brutally but honestly as the title of the episode and the event. Why the F art? Or in Slovenian, Zakaj art? This might sound as an empty and endlessly ruminated phrase, but the more contemporary art evolves, the more society keeps pushing forward and capitalism keeps dominating, the more we keep running into this. We will try to address it, but not give a definitive answer. Why should we keep making art and for who it is, or should we still make it? What is contemporary art, or more concisely, which art should we think about when we talk about contemporary art? And lastly, why should art criticism stick around? Or maybe why shouldn't? Lav, your zine centers around your residency in Paris, where you plan to compare Belgrade to the Belgrade scene to the scene here, there. And during your stay there, you visited a lot of what could be only described as centers of power or pillars of the Western hegemony and the Western canon. Within your text, you already mentioned how the coloniality and other similar practices addressing the imbalance of power have now become part of the same neo-colonial, neoliberal artwork machine. So, to start with this, a very loaded question, something that might not be that easily answered, but we'll try to kind of go through it. How do you view contemporary art, and how should we think about it?
Well, I think what we studied at academia, I think it is mostly, probably in Ljubljana as well, people usually refer to a British philosopher, Peter Osborne, who is a philosopher of contemporary art. It's basically a Euro-American term that goes parallel with the spread of neoliberal globalization. And basically it's like a very wide umbrella term that encompasses basically everything is welcome, everything is contemporary art, except for these things that are, extremely traditional or just repeating the things that have already happened. He has this, basically it's from time perspective, it's this kind of art after the Cold War, after 1989, the fall of Berlin Wall. On a space level, it is art that has now a global reach, and on paper, art from all across the world is welcome. And on a third level, on a more, aesthetical level, it is what Osborne calls post-conceptual state. So basically, he claims that all of the contemporary art has to have some kind of concept behind it, not just under quotation marks, just to be. And then there is other philosopher that I find that is very critical towards the term contemporary art, Suhail Malik. I recommend everybody to read him. He's a fantastic thinker. He's much more critical towards that term, and he thinks that this umbrella term, this catch-all term, is basically a cop-out from having any kind of political position or agency. That contemporary art now functions as a kind of a safe haven, where criticality can be practiced, but not to endanger anything. So yeah, these are some of the, I would say, for me personally, two key thinkers. But what I want to say is, and what I hope that I kind of touch on in the zine, is the crisis of this term, mainly because of these outside factors, that the factor that this neoliberal globalized world is now crashing, that this kind of catch-all, everybody's welcome aesthetic thing is kind of losing its, not only urgency or basically kind of relevance. There's kind of a sense of exhaustion, and I think this is written a lot in art criticism all over the world in the past few years. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I would say that maybe contemporary art as a term is a sort of cop-out when we ran out of all the isms, in a way. How to describe something that doesn't have an ideology or idea behind. But at the same time, it's also a catch-all term in a way to describe something that hasn't yet been historicized. So in that sense, it's about everything is welcome, everything that's happening now is contemporary art. I think that kind of works, and I think we shouldn't stress about it in that way, and we should kind of broaden the term to take anything that's happening at that time, even if it's traditional, I don't know, Nepali art that happens to be painted in the same style as it was, I don't know, 1,000 years ago, but it's done now by an artist that kind of takes on that tradition. It's not going to be the art that was done then, even though it's very similar and all of that. It's still going to be contemporary in that way. But at the state we are now, yet undefined where to put it in history. I think what becomes then the question is when something is not contemporary art anymore, and this is something that Masha and I spoke before the podcast. The question is contemporary art something that happens only after somebody dies? I mean, like when it is historicized. And then we joke that the sooner you die, the sooner you can be part of history.
It also matters where this art is presented, if it is presented. Because if you present this Nepali art in Venice Biennale, it is a totally different concept.
That's actually what's kind of happening, right? What we see in the last couple of Biennales, we keep seeing more and more of art coming from outside Europe, more and more art that is kind of taking in consideration more indigenous types of art, but also indigenous kind of experiences, and the whole idea of the colonialism. So this is where and why I even wanted to start talking about this, because in your zine you talk about contemporary art. You don't speak much about the Belgrade scene actually in the zine. You end up kind of taking a stance where we should know what's happening there. But you speak a lot about things you've seen in Paris, which were, for the most part, at least what you kind of put down, bigger or more important institutions that are definitely kind of directing what Western positions are. Not just what Western art is, but what Western positions are. Also, you mentioned with the Biennale, which is kind of trying to take into account the idea of the coloniality that has been around for decades, and kind of embracing that. But you again mentioned that this becomes then part of it. So even when they kind of try, they become the same art that should be shown to kind of not put in power the neoliberal kind of hegemony that the West art has over art in general, or the art market, is kind of then reinforced with, we're washing our hands, and here's a bit of, I don't know, Colombian art, is that fine, kind of thing. That is where I kind of wanted to go, because then I was wondering, like, what about all other contemporary art that happens and is happening, and it is being exhibited, and is being kind of living and going through also in the Western kind of societies. Within the cultural sector in that place, for example, it could be Belgrade, or it could be Slovenia, or even Paris, but it's actually not part of this same kind of huge art market and a huge kind of system where we want to kind of appease certain collectors or certain people.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Paris doesn't have this kind of the same status that it had like in the, let's say, second half of the 19th century and until the Second World War, where it was kind of like de facto a capital of Western art. So after the Second World War, it was of course like replaced mostly with like New York. But for me personally, it was for the first time in my life I visited such a big city. I haven't been to, I don't know, London, New York, whatever. There are these also other so-called art capitals, like, for example, Seoul or Tokyo, or I don't know, as of recent, maybe Jakarta. Or now, there's also like in the last 2 years, like more of this like Gulf states. So there was the Art Basel in Qatar as of recent. So yeah, it was like kind of my first experience of like seeing in person all of these like huge institutions. And of course, like Paris has this thing of like it's an ex-imperial city, so its own architecture and urbanism is very imposing. And then of course it has this like Louvre and all of these like huge museums. And then as for like, for example, for contemporary art, there was this thing of like Nicolas Bourriaud's, while he was a curator in Palais de Tokyo in the 90s, and how this relational aesthetic was one of the foundational so-called isms of the contemporary art. In the zine, I wanted to touch upon all of these just kind of like my impressions of seeing all of these like very produced, very well produced exhibitions. And then there was this thing of like, I don't know. And then on the other side, this is the thing also that I touch upon is watching Biennale. Of course, I've never been in person in Biennale, but watching all of these things happening on Instagram, on stories, on posts. So I don't know, I think, for example, that very Biennale in 2024, I think that's also a part of the symptom of exhaustion of contemporary art, that kind of like, which is kind of also similar to this, like, what was happening in Paris in the beginning of 20th century, this kind of like a need for Western artists or art system to kind of, how can I say, freshens itself with taking up something that is unknown, under quotation marks, unknown to them. So I think that's the kind of the turn towards this indigenous art, which is also kind of a part of this kind of post-colonial guilt, which is like, for example, in France, it's actually like very, very strong, and like it's a racially very segregated society. It's kind of like a combination of these two things that I think brought this turn towards the so-called indigenous art. What I failed to mention is this thing of like, in theory, contemporary art is post-medium. It has a post-medium condition. So all of the mediums, even the so-called traditional ones, also the new ones, digital, blah, 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 is all like on paper very welcome. So yeah, I don't know.
In that sense, mentioning post-medium and all of that, that's kind of interesting within the context of the Biennale as one of these kind of, for Central Europe or maybe also worldwide, kind of set a bit of a stage, what's kind of happening, not so much necessarily for the market point of view, but kind of the direction where art is kind of going. At the same time, there is the whole idea that because Venice Biennial is so important, they're becoming increasingly more and more aware that whatever they do, it impacts kind of the directions. That's also why we see more and more of this kind of post-colonial and the coloniality happening. And like the last curator, she was also invited. I think she was from somewhere from Africa. I don't remember.
Yeah, like in the sense of like origins, but she had a very elite education in, I think, mainly Britain and Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the idea to kind of expand further, and in this kind of sense, yeah, maybe 2 or 3 biennials back, you've seen a lot of kind of different mediums, and now, like with the last few, you're seeing increasingly more and more painting. It feels like we're kind of going back to what maybe the Venice Biennial was in the maybe 60s, 70s, which is kind of classic in that way. So we are also seeing kind of a flattening now a bit of this kind of embracing of kind of non-mediality in what you're saying.
But I think we also like, I don't know how it is, for example, in Ljubljana, but for example, in Belgrade, like art academy or like art history department, it is still like very much centered, like what the current thing is what is in Venice Biennale. And there's this kind of like a fascination and like still this kind of aura of prestige around the Venice Biennale, even among the like artists that are supposedly like very critical. But like, I think there's this thing of that Venice Biennale is a conservative institution, like people forget, even often forget, like this thing of like of 20th century's protests against the Venice Biennale from futurists who were like protesting it from more like proto-fascist positions, but they were protesting it as bourgeois institutions, then to surrealists, then to, of course, like 1968, which was like the biggest protest against the Venice Biennale, which was like parallel with the student uprising, which was like very strong in Italy, but across the Europe. And this very last Biennale, which was protested by ANGA Alliance, Art Not Genocide Alliance, because of not exclusion of Israeli pavilion. So I think that there is like, and of course, you know, like in Venice Biennale is organized around the national pavilions. And of course, like all of these representations are basically state-sanctioned art. I mean, the art that states want to represent themselves with, that states don't find, problematic or whatever. And then you have, you know, all of these things of like central pavilion, which is like curated by the guest curators. But I think it's just like, I don't think that Venice Biennale has actually at any point has been, and like there's this thing of like until 1968, Venice Biennale was actually an extremely conservative institution, and then after the student protest, it went into this long process that is still going on of like trying to be kind of like hip and up to times. But like before 1968, it was like basically all of it was like paintings and sculptures. So yeah, I don't know. And then, of course, but there's this whole system of like biennales from, I don't know, more avant-garde, like, I don't know, Documenta. Documenta is not technically biennale, but it's like mega exhibitions. Or, I don't know, this kind of unofficial EU Biennale Manifesta, which actually was in Ljubljana in 2000, if I'm not mistaken, which was also protested. And this, especially this like biennial boom since the 90s, which is also parallel to this like what is contemporary art, this expansion, the creation of tens and tens of biennials across the world, which were used basically by states to kind of signal that they are open, that they have joined the new globalized world, and that they are ready for business.
My plan was to read some of the quotes from your zines, so we can maybe attach to some of your statements or not. But for example, the first one that comes to mind regarding to this, what is contemporary art and what is not, what it lacks, you wrote, "I miss real care, enthusiasm and passion. I want to feel something when I see the artwork. I can't take irony, cynicism, blaze attitude, coolness, insincerity anymore. Terror of ironic construction." What do we think about that, and maybe how can you relate this statement to the Belgrade scene, if you can, or is it just on art in general, contemporary art in general?
I wouldn't say that in Belgrade necessarily that there is this kind of, maybe in some parts there is this kind of like attitude. But for example, there's this whole thing of, for example, Anne Imhoff's like German pavilion, or like, for example, or like what is like more pop kind of like more pop cultural is this kind of like Demna's Balenciaga of like this kind of like ironic posture. Which, like, I mean, it's very fascinating, and I think, I don't know, for example, I think Demna is a fantastic commentator. He has been a fantastic commentator for the past 10 years.
Do you think the irony is an easy way out?
Yeah,
also
that is
for
a thing
us who are not artists, who are just talking about art.
I think that there are limits to it. Yeah, this is a thing that I'm more like kind of concerned with it, because like it can be funny, but it reaches it has a kind of like a limit to it. And for example, there was, for me personally, this is something that is going in the background in the zine, is like after the Gaza, this kind of like whole ironic stance is kind of very strange. I don't know, like this kind of like lack of commitment and being like somewhere like, but this is, for example, what Suhail Malik actually criticizes contemporary art for. It's kind of like an island separated from the society, where you can be kind of, even at best, you can be kind of like critical, but like it is just like kind of outside of the society. And so this is the part from that attitude that kind of, I wouldn't say worries me, but that I find something strange about it.
So Jerne, you also wanted to talk about the independent scene here or in Belgrade or anywhere. And maybe if we start just from this stance where this zine was made, Matriarchia is like an autonomous space. Can you maybe tell us more about this space and how do you connect to it?
So Matriarchia, which kind of translates into matriarchy, but this is also a very good question in connection to this irony thing. It's basically a collective, artist collective, which is, how can I say, I don't work there. I know some people are kind of like friends and acquaintances. I have been following their work since the beginning. And it's like a collection of people that are doing different stuff from, I don't know, from Varikina that does mostly zines, but also does some like clothing, to people doing graphics, to people doing a lot of like designing stuff. But what I find, for example, in connection to this kind of ironic thing, they work a lot. It's basically kind of the whole aesthetic thing is so-called outsider art. So they are working with a lot of people that are not professional artists, that have like special needs, and They have their own space that they rent. It's kind of like people come in and out during the day, and there's kind of like how can I say? I don't want to use this lame like creative flow, but it's kind of like very spontaneous things going on. But they also like do some commission stuff. They did some designs for some festivals, like graphic design. They do some like how can I say some kind of party events. They do this Novo Doba festival, which is a festival of independent comics. A lot of comics are produced in Matriarchia, and I kind of find it like that space and that whole aesthetic. It is much more relaxed and kind of even has an anti-elitist stance. I feel much better in this type of spaces and with this type of people than in this kind of like stiff white cube.
It's not in a way became commercial, so like the elite fancy galleries in Belgrade do not mix with this scene, or maybe because the Belgrade has like 1.5 million people, so can you even keep up with it, or is it a thing that like everybody knows each other, or is it not?
No, everybody knows everybody. It's not such a big. I mean, technically it is a big city, but it's not that big of a city, and people at least know of each other and what other people are doing. I mean, if you have some basic curiosity. But I think that Matriarchia has kept its kind of, I don't want to use this word autonomy, but they collaborate with some like institutions, galleries, individuals, but they have their own kind of like position, aesthetic and everything. They kept it. It has not become kind of like a commercial. And Matriarchia now has been existing for years and years. So I think, yeah, their position is fine. Yeah, I don't think that. I mean, of course, there are of course people that I don't know. Think that it's not serious art, that it's not high art. Of course, some people will think these things, but it's not important.
Yeah, no, I think that their position is quite well established also here, because we got a lot of, also from Matriarchia and also from Varikina, and like the whole thing with Raw Collective doing photography, and they also sent us some zines. So I think that at least we have some knowledge about that they are growing and that they have some audience and also some artists that are actually very good.
We as in DobraVaga.
And also we as Ljubljana.
I think that here is a bit of the idea of contemporary art being very elitist and being kind of sanctioned and clean and polished and unproblematic and ironic only just how much it can be falls apart for me, because when I think also about contemporary art, I also think about all of these other things that maybe are not so in the center of everything, that are maybe a bit on the margins, on the sides, or not the mainstream things and not seen maybe at biennials and places like that. I keep questioning then in the sense of why do we make art? In that way, what's the point of making art? Are we making art?
What's the point of making art? Please.
Are we making art to make a stance? Are we making art to kind of convey something beyond just words and ideology? Just why?
Jarni, out of us three, you are an artist, so maybe you should tell us.
Yeah, why do we make art?
We just talk about it and write about it.
I can say why I think art is important, but it's gonna take a few minutes. Maybe I'll start with where art kind of falls in the society as a thing, or as a concept, or as a entity. Art is one of those ways of maybe communication or kind of transmitting something from someone to someone else, where we kind of allow a lot of unclarity, a lot of openness in a way. And this is one of the positions why I think art has a special place, and art also is not just about conveying something in a way. So if we think about conversations, they try to be kind of precise and saying things, and kind of you want the other person to understand you, and you kind of, if they don't, you kind of keep talking until you kind of reach a common agreement of what one is saying and the other one is hearing. With art is a bit different. Art is not something that you kind of create in a way that you put a coherent message in there, but you kind of convey a lot of the unspoken things, a lot of the things that you maybe just feel, a lot of the things that kind of elicit feelings. Maybe you put in art something that you're not even thinking about, but it kind of takes place in there. So art becomes a method, a way for somebody to create new experiences, new conversations in a way, but not conversations between two people, but conversations with things that happen to exist and the person looking at them. Because within creating an artwork, you are not kind of creating a letter with a message, but you're creating something that then lives on. It's there. It has its own life. You kind of made your best. It's like with a kid. You make a kid, you kind of teach them to do something, and then they do something else. You have no control after a while, and that's what happens, and that's fine. And that's also where a lot of the art criticism then comes in, a lot of kind of ways of looking at things that are seemingly simple or easy to understand, but then you have like 10 different people with 10 different kind of interpretations of the same picture. But yeah. So art lives then in a space that allows for creating new kind of emotions, new kind of ideas that are beyond what we can do with just words in that way, or with very precise kind of instructions. So yeah, art is then not necessarily just about kind of being there to elicit certain, to kind of give a mirror to society, to elicit something that would say, oh no, we shouldn't be doing that, or we should be kind of thinking about that and be critical. Art can be also about very stupid and mundane things, but still be valid in that sense. And I think this is, maybe we're kind of now very used that art has to be very critical, but we're kind of forgetting that not always.
Yeah, what happens, this was great, thank you. What happens when the number of your children is enormous and most of them are trash?
I mean, trailer park situation, right?
Because this is the source of our problems, right?
But you know how it is with kids? If they're stupid, they'll bring themselves to that. Same is with art. If it's trash, it's just gonna be forgotten. It's fine. I mean, you need to make a lot of art to make something that's kind of really good.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm coming
Don't
from
make a lot of kids. There's too many of us right now.
You know, I'm coming from the stance that we are in time of overproduction of art, and even then, so little people care about art.
I wouldn't say that we are in a.
I know, but
just let me do a comment. Not in overproduction of making art. We are in overproduction of making art shows. Slight difference.
Yeah, but it's connected.
It is, but then you have people who will.
Then we are also in overproduction of making of artists, art students, people who are not art students but are just curating and talking about art.
Good point, because you're now touching on something else. Who art is for, and why are we making it? For who are we making it, and who should have access to it, and in what way? So you probably went through the script and seen me writing there. Should art be democratized? This is something that I've been thinking a lot. I don't have answers, but the thing is, a lot of art now is very top-down kind of idea. So we have to have good art. That art has to be approved by so many people. That art has to be excellent, and it has to hang in a good museum. Otherwise, it's not good. Otherwise, it's trash, right? But this creates a problem. If we are making art for people, then it becomes very hard to reach that specific art. You just cannot hang or produce art, a lot of art that can be distributed in the same way as movies can, that you just kind of reproduce. A lot of art history is actually dependent on this idea of, yeah, we have those amazing things there, and you're gonna see maybe 5 of them, or 10, depends on how much you travel. Or maybe 1 if you don't travel and you have only 1 in your country. What about all the rest? That it might be actually good, but just not talked so much about. And where do we kind of, what do we want actually? What do you think, Lav?
I don't know. I really agree with your reason to do art. I think it's inherent to express ourselves, to go through things through art, and I think you made a really important distinction there. And I think this is something of like how art system operates. For example, recently I saw a couple of residency open calls, and there's, for example, this thing of like a criteria that you have to have you need to have had an exhibition, for example, in the past 2 years, or I don't know, probably here, like to get this status and to get retirement funds or like healthcare coverage. I don't know how it is in Slovenia, but in Serbia you can get, with the status of being an artist, you can get retirement funds and healthcare coverage, and you have to be constantly exhibiting to do these things. And especially there's this whole thing of like attention economy of social media, or that you have to be constantly present, or that you will get instantly quote unquote forgotten. There's this whole thing of like that our system loves emerging and young artists and just like eats through them and shits them out, and that there is like a lack of, we talked a bit yesterday about this lack of transgenerational dialogue, or even like just like any engagement, transgenerational engagement. So I think that all of these things, I think that they're quite questions, but I think it's very important to make concrete changes. For example, maybe you are working on some artwork or something that you want to do for 10 years, but you don't have to exhibit through these 10 years. You can just appear after 10 years with your artworks. So I think that kind of the system has to recalibrate itself towards like being, how can I say, to host this type of things and this type of like tempo of working. And I think in relation to your last question, I think that there's this thing of like more ingraining like art into everyday life. But I'm not talking about this thing of like, a lot of contemporary art is this kind of like, I don't know, public art, or this relational aesthetics, doing some kind of like community work, etc., which like there is also, at least in Belgrade, like a really strong sense of exhaustion from all of this type of stuff. And how to, and there's like, for example, I have a lot of friends that are like artists, and that are just like people, like they're not professional artists, they're not living from it, they have their day jobs, and then in their free time on the weekends they're doing stuff, they manage to to produce enough artworks that they are satisfied with in a couple of years and then exhibit, and that some of them like struggle with this thing of like that they are perceived by the galleries that they are kind of like not quote unquote in or trendy or however you want to call it. So
yeah, like would you, the question is art important, or is the art exhibition important? And even if art exhibition is important, can you live off of it? Because even if you do exhibit, maybe you exhibit in not so referential galleries that won't pay you much. So if you want to live off art, you have to sell it successfully. And if your art is not sellable, what are you gonna do? You cannot rely on the art is important part. It won't feed you. And also, if good art is important, let's say good art is important, how do we know when art is good? This is the part when we can go to the critics part, because if back in the days critic would say which art is good and then this art would exhibit and then this art would sell, now this is not the case anymore. Otherwise we would also be rich.
Yeah, but for example, I really like that critics don't determine whether art is good. I think, like, for example, this kind of like not only digital age but like especially like social media really turn these kind of like tables around. These things that, like, in this sense of like how quality or value of certain art is kind of created, I don't think it's fully like democratic or whatever, because it still relies on galleries, on academia, on like all of these institutions shouldn't be minimized. They are still quite strong actually, but I think it's more democratic than probably ever, at least for this kind of like visual arts.
Jerne, you wanted to add something about creating value relating to crypto AI stuff.
Yeah, the idea that we are just basically feeding, especially with the contemporary art that we were talking about before, we're just creating value through art, which is basically just like all of these new emerging markets that are speculation, all of that. How do we go about that? Or do we kind of try to circumvent that and think of a different kind of economy for art? This also relates then back to what Masha said about you're not getting paid. You said that you could work for 10 years and just produce a body of work, or that you don't exhibit often, or the artist fee are small, etc., etc. So how do we then create alternative kind of value chain in a sense that is not then dependent on this idea of following the art market as speculation?
I think that there is like right now, some people are critical of it. I think that there's like literally in the last, I would say, year or 2 years, there's this kind of like a really strong shift that kind of how can I say, the most kind of like the trendy commissioners of contemporary, what is like called contemporary art, have become actually like fashion brands, and these like luxury brands that are kind of like buying their whole, that they are like strengthening their kind of image of and status of luxury with this like connection to contemporary art. We see this, which I kind of also like mentioned, for example, in Paris, this is like extremely visible. You have like Louis Vuitton Foundation, which is like done by Frank Gehry, which is this like crazy building, which actually has a very decent programming, and in a sense of production, I've never seen anything like that in my life, in sense of production of exhibitions. And you have this Pinault Foundation, he's a founder of Kering Group, which owns, I know that he owns Gucci, I think he also owns Balenciaga, whatever. There's this other place, he bought this old building in the center of Paris, and they also have fantastic exhibitions, okay, not maybe fantastic, really good exhibitions of contemporary art, and they're kind of like their position. And there's this other thing that they're also like commissioning, for example, advertising, which is done more and more by artists. There's also this thing of like after the AI, which is also kind of a current trend of that certain brands want to emphasize that they are not doing anything by AI, but that things are done by hands and by real people, by real artists working with hands. So you have this whole thing. I think there is a resurgence of this kind of like craftsy aesthetic, collages. Some people are of course like critical because of you are not allowed to be, I don't know, critical in these spaces. But as you said, like not all art should. I mean, this is also like a very. But this is a thing of like post 2016, post Brexit, post Trump demand of like that art has to be political, which I think has suffocated really a lot of art production. And there is like it appeared like kind of simultaneously while I was finishing the zine. New York's critic, Dean Kissick, he wrote this text called The Painted Protest. There have been like numerous criticism of his criticism, but I think it's actually a really, really good text. And he talks about this, like how 2015-16 was a turning point in this kind of like growth of demand of political art, which is like very, he calls this the painted protest, like very easily readable, digestible, that you can align, that the kind of like more liberal oriented viewers can see their values confirmed in the artworks that they see. And I don't know, Dean Kissick thinks that this thing is really a problem. Other critics of him think that he kind of like, there is kind of like right-wing coded criticism that it is kind of like parallel to this kind of backlash to woke ideology. But I don't know, I recommend everybody to read all of these essays there. I think it's a very interesting debate.
Maybe we return to the role we have now, or when we write about art, since you're already mentioning critics, and then you also, at some point, you mentioned maybe critics shouldn't decide what is important, what is not. There was one small passage from your zine. Oh, actually, I have it here. I can just read it out. You wrote, I wonder if maybe this democratization of criticism, writing reviews, or literally everything on platforms of techno-feudalists, Letterboxd, Goodreads, can kill the professional opinion of art. And I would just kind of go forward from this, since maybe we're not deciding anymore if art is good or not, or our professional kind of opinions are kind of irrelevant in a way. If we are not to decide what is good, should we then have a Letterboxd equivalent for just art and just kind of have it, people decide and we just quit and that's it?
I think it's more morbid than that. I don't think the Letterboxd for art would stick.
Yeah, I don't think that there would be enough people to make this application or website like not even profitable, but just to survive. I think that is the.
I mean, I could see some people, artists would probably go, and if there's anonymity behind it, I can see a lot of artists writing things.
No, but there's this thing of like supposedly there's this like LA critic, who is anonymous. It's called Diva Corp, and they're doing this like very unhinged, very short reviews, kind of takedowns of LA art scene, which is infamously like very, how can I say, shallow. So I think there are this kind of like, but these are individuals, you know, like, and also
LA scene is bigger, you know.
No, yeah,
can you imagine doing this for Belgrade?
No.
Can you even stay anonymous?
In Belgrade.
Or in Ljubljana, I mean. I would love to write anonymous critics, but everybody would know it was me. So
Maybe anonymity could be in numbers. If we get, I don't know, 5 to 10 critics to write anonymously and nobody knows who of us is.
There was, for example, in Belgrade, like it has kind of, I mean, in probably 2 more people, it has a cult status. There's this thing of like, it was in the Tumblr era. It was called Sudimac Stojanović. It was like a Tumblr blog. There were like 2 young artists, and they were writing art reviews. And I think they wrote like around 10 short pieces altogether, and then they shut down, moved on with their lives. I know that everybody was reading this. I mean, they were like very harsh, and they were like kind of funny, and everybody was like reading. I mean, everybody. But this is what I'm saying, like, scene is quite very small.
And also, you know, what do you get out of the review? Because, for example, I don't know, in the case of Letterboxd, you watch a movie and later you read the reviews and you are like, hey, I agree or I do not agree. Or maybe you read reviews before you decide if you're going to watch it or not, besides spoilers, for example. But and also, as you mentioned in your zine, like Google restaurant reviews are more useful than anything we've ever written, because they're useful, right? How, you know, in what way is art critic useful to regular people who already missed the exhibition and are not even maybe interested in art per se? Everybody has to eat and everybody likes movies. This is a very basic statement, but, you know, it's still true.
It's an elite sport, I don't know.
Shall we get a special status then? Like
no. No, but like...
the Olympics of art critics.
Like, I used to think that kind of... until recently, like, all of these things are kind of useless, but I'm kind of like... With AI, I'm not this kind of like... technophobe or whatever, but like I see the more value in kind of like humanities, in this thing of like having like media literacy, being able to read all of the things that are going on. And I think actually people from humanities, maybe it's not going to happen through exhibition reviews necessarily. Knowledge that is not easily accessible, that is not online, that cannot be found by AI. I think that this type of like skills are actually becoming more and more important. But I think it's a question of like how do you and where do you communicate them, and how do you which language do you use, what platforms do you use, in this sense of this kind of like, I don't know, in paper review. I don't know, do you have like in like newspaper exhibition reviews here?
They rest in peace. I am listening to you now and you sound much more optimistic than in your zine. For example, quote, I feel like I'm about to explode from pent-up depression, anxiety, and frustration, which I relate to a lot. And then still I want to write something publicly because I think it's important to think about art. Why?
I don't know, like in the last couple of months, I'm kind of worried that I'm kind of like really stuck in, but like I'm 31 now. And like I really feel like I'm stuck in a habit. Like I'm wondering whether it's like a habit of just like, it's something that you've been doing and then you have to just, you know, like, what am I going to do and change and do different? And yeah, I don't know. At the other end of this kind of like depression comes the sunnier side.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
After help. I'll ask you this, then you'll probably ask me back the same thing, but why do we write art reviews? We joke about that nobody reads them. If we think that it's kind of irrelevant and it's kind of lost a bit, there's no place to write them almost, etc., etc. So why, both of you, why do you keep writing them if we are just so like, nah? I'm
still answering this because this is a cynical automatic response, because I apparently I have nothing better to do, or maybe this is something that I convinced myself that maybe I am good at or good enough. But I don't have a reasonable, happy answer.
I don't know how it is here, but for example, in Belgrade, people, this kind of like a habit of people are like hating on art critics. But there's this misconception but this is also part of this like letterbox of giving like, I don't know, 5 stars, a score from 1 to 10, 0 to 10, whatever. I think for me personally, I'm not interested in this kind of like giving a score, good, bad, whatever. But for me personally, what still keeps me interesting is kind of like trying to make sense. As for writing, like for exactly writing, it's kind of like you are trying to clear up your thoughts and trying to make. It's a different thing, like when you are thinking when you are in your head, and there is a whole other thing, and when you try to put it into words and on paper, whatever, type it in a computer.
Can I be cynical for a second?
Da.
If that's part of it, like just writing things down and kind of coming to a conclusion through the method of writing, why publish? I mean,
Just journal.
just journal, yeah.
But I think it's the same like with art. Like there's kind of like a there's this. I think that there's this kind of like universal human need of like sharing something with other people, and I think that there's also a thing which I personally really love is like. You done something, whatever it is, you share it with people, and then people have some kind of like opinions, thoughts, relate to it.
But do they?
Okay, no.
Do you get feedback on your art critics besides the artist who says thank you? Maybe.
It can be toxic.
Or worse.
Yeah, it can be toxic for sure. That is a bad part.
I mean, I love your enthusiasm, but is it just ego tripping?
I personally think that like all of the people that are, myself included, like that are working in arts, we are at least a bit of like narcissists. So I think there's also this kind of like a part of it. I don't know. I'm more interested in this kind of like a universal like need to, I don't know, share whatever you want to share, and to, I don't know, maybe hopefully be kind of like understood, feel seen, get some other point. Or like, there's also this thing of like a process, like being in this process, like this process can be like, you can learn a lot. Like if you really engage, if you are really truthful, whether you're artist, a critic, whatever you're doing, if you're really true, if you are really, I don't know, how can I say, committed to it, then there's this like part of like learning and getting to know about others, other things, yourself in that process. So I think there's also like a enormous value. Even maybe the key value is in this process.
Would you say that, I refer also to your zine, incorporating these different pop references and something that is connected to contemporary world and maybe more broadly understood as something that is in right now, is this a gateway to the broader public, or is it just the thing that you personally like to use, or maybe refer to, I don't know, like Sex in the City, or also like the fashion brands like Balenciaga, you said?
I mean, I generally actually really love popular culture, and I think there's like exciting stuff going on and exciting debates going around things that happen. But I also think that this kind of like I have also this like, I really dislike how, for example, this like this so-called contemporary art really thinks that it's kind of above, or like author, cinema, or whatever, that they're like above, that they're like high culture versus low culture. I think that this whole distinction, I really have this hatred towards this division. And I think that even like, like how, for example, how contemporary art prides itself on being like avant-garde up to its times, like actually, especially in my opinion, in the past few years, like pop culture can often be more quote unquote hip
and
than
touching.
Easily
understood.
No, but like, and it's also this thing of like but this is for me like a political commitment of like meeting, like you have to engage with like what people like, you have to meet people where they are, you have to,
or what they hate.
Sure.
This is also where people are.
For me personally, it's not this kind of like this meme, like hi fellow kids, how are you doing, whatever, like with this actor.
A nice meme with Buscemi.
I think we actually have to really get out of our white cubes and whatever we are, where academia, and unlearn all of this like elite institutional practices and kind of like. But this is also related to this thing of like where art lives, this question of democratization of art. Yeah.
So you, in a way, have high hopes.
Not really, actually.
I mean, we clearly are writing not just for, I don't know, ourselves and not for people who are in the know, because I'm also a big...
I'm writing it for the ministry.
Yeah, just for them. But then you can just write random words they won't read. So we do kind of take in consideration that the person reading might not know everything about art, and then it's good to meet them halfway, or at least, or maybe even further than halfway, just taking them by the hand and kind of explain it plain and simple in a way, but at the same time kind of provide enough information to be not just very simplistic and patronizing.
Yeah, this is also like a question of language, of like for this whole, like in my opinion, like terror of post-structuralist language, of like writing like complicated, using big words, whatever.
And that's unnecessary in art criticism. Actually, it's there's a big school of people who actually oppose kind of writing things to hermetically. Yeah. So that's kind of taken in consideration in a way. The question is then, if we are not sure if somebody is reading, if we're still questioning all of that, are we still adding anything of value, even if it's not being read? Are we thinking? I mean, I'll just say that from my view, I think this is kind of needed, and that needs to be written about art, and it should be addressed to people, and it would be great if people read. It's a bonus if they do, but it also is not just for now. Art criticism might come. I mean, the review you're writing maybe comes helpful in 10 years. You don't know, because it really depends on who you are writing about, which show you're writing about, and how history is going to turn. I know for a fact that when you write about something, you will look things up, and all the reviews can help, especially if you're writing about something more historically. So are we adding then anything of value? Is this something you consider value? Or we come back to the questions, shall we still be doing it? Should we be supported? In what ways? And maybe, is this something that needs to be supported more from the government, or should we just be on the mercy of the market?
What has been like painfully obvious, like from this like viewpoint of capital, it's obviously not of value, especially like with the changes of like culture of capitalist class, which like, for example, in 20th century still had this kind of like commitment to some kind of like shared public goods or public institutions, especially like, for example, in the United States, how they founded like museums, galleries, operas, theaters, blah, blah, blah. For example, with this like Silicon Valley, there is no kind of any commitment to this, any type of this project. Especially like contemporary capital, we are completely like useless. But I think from like different viewpoints, there is actually real value. But this for me personally, it brings back to this thing of like the same as with like art. It's kind of like trying to make sense of a world and yourself in it. And I think it's also like this kind of like historical perspective. Like I think, yeah, it's important to write down what is going on now, whatever that may be. Though I'm kind of like also like increasingly skeptical of this perspective of posterior. I mean, of somebody being in the future that is interested. That there will be anybody in the future, and that there will be anybody interested in all of these things, and especially with this like crumbling of all of these like public and common institutions, like I don't know, libraries, whatever. But there is also a specific thing. I don't know how it is here, but for example, in Belgrade, there's like with these like younger artists, we had this like kind of situation last year. This kind of like obsession to kind of like to, how can I say, make yourself part of the history, because we had this like huge student movement last year, and then there were these like artists like, oh, we are doing the art that will be studied in the future, and I'm like, I'm not really sure.
What future?
Yeah, like, but I'm not talking. I'm not talking about this like climate catastrophe, like a single thing that like wipes the whole humanity, like not this type of stuff, but like already this field is messed up. I don't know. I'm really not sure.
I think I'll just add one small thing and then maybe we can kind of wrap up. We have also an audience that maybe has some questions, maybe not. If we're democratizing art maybe and it becomes more and more kind of not so geared to specific things, maybe the historical kind of aspect of it dies with it in a bit. Because you don't have specific people to revere in that way. It becomes kind of the traditional art that you kind of have these things but maybe don't describe to certain people. But yeah, there's more of a side note of how art could and could not be historicized. So before we kind of close off, if there's any questions, comments, or just telling us to quit maybe.
Anonymous.
The audience.
You can also say that you disagree.
Yeah, questions can be stupid, or you can just be against what we said. It's also fine. That's also some comment.
Kakšno vprašanje?
Yeah.
Eto, daj pridi sem, da boš on air. Povej najprej, kdo si.
Yeah. So we were hearing about 3 art critics asking themselves about what the meaning of their work is. And I find myself thinking the same stuff as an artist. So usually it's easier if someone else tells you what the meaning is. So I think that, looking from an anthropological point of view or a historical point of view, even if you don't have any readers now, or even if you think that what you're doing is futile, I think it's super important that you do it because, I don't know, what is contemporary now, it's not going to be contemporary in 30, 40 years, if we are even here in 30, 40 years. But in terms of something historical and in terms of finding out something about what was happening then, because I believe that culture is a big part of like the bigger picture. I think your work is important in that sense, even if it feels unimportant now or worthless.
Thank you for this pep talk. Like mentioning that maybe our work now is not contemporary, maybe in 20, 30 years, as we mentioned before, after we die, right? Then our work won't be contemporary anymore, it will be historic.
So the sooner you die, the sooner you become part of history.
Maybe this is the good part of small scene. You get in the canon, maybe.
Maybe. So that's it. No more questions.
Anybody else?
Comments?
Thank you, Lav, for joining us in this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for questioning your own work and life choices with us.
Again, I encourage everybody to check the zine. You can also buy it and check the exhibition. And thank you, DobraVaga, for hosting us, and to all of you for coming. And now, one big applause, please. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Reci adijo.
Hvala. Ciao.
Ajde, ciao.
Ciao.